That's how we should have started the first Rockwell episode.
The
sound of a
pop
whiskey
cork.
bottle being slowly opened. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just like the sound of pouring.
Yeah, and then glass
on
hitting
ice.
the floor.
Yeah.
And the sound of pouring, it doesn't stop for like 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, next time. It'll come back around. Pierce is not as famous a drinker as Rockwell.
No.
Hey guys, welcome back to The Empire Never Ended. I'm Fritz. Here's Boris. Here's
Hey.
Ray. And boy, do we have
Hey.
a treat for you today.
That's never a good thing when you say that.
Yeah, you're right. I would say that this guy is probably one of the eviler people we've covered in this arc. I would say, like, we've got a lot of freaks. We've got a lot of people. You know, like, it's possible because he's so pathetic. It is possible to sympathize a little bit even with Rockwell, just because like what a fucking shitty childhood that guy had. You know.
Yeah.
Pierce, who we're talking about today, William Luther Pierce III.
I mean, he even has a name, like an evil guy.
Yes, he does. William Luther Pierce III is like legitimately like a Bond villain bad guy. Like
Yeah.
later in his life, this man would give interviews about how he will take over the world while literally petting a white cat in a rotating chair.
Yes.
I mean, you can't
Yeah.
get more like fucking Austin Powers than that, you know. He's like Dr. Evil.
Yeah.
Dr.
He had his little
Evil.
Doctor Evil.
That's
He,
it.
he,
yes.
he does. He has the Doctor Evil kind of liquid hot magma. It could be him.
Yes. Yes. All right, guys. Should we get into it? We're doing a
let's do
couple. We're doing a couple things here. So we're gonna. This episode is gonna be part one, and we're gonna talk about the first half of his life, and then after that, we're gonna have a premium episode that should be about some of his literature.
Oh.
He's a fashfic pioneer. He is, and then we're gonna get to his later life, and I think the fourth episode is gonna be about his religion. That's our plan here.
Ambitious.
It's an ambitious plan, but a necessary one. All right. So, here we go. I don't really have subtitles for this, intertitles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have intertitles for this, so maybe we can make them up as we go. But I guess I've tentatively called this first part of the episode Don Juan in Hell, and I'll explain why in a moment.
All right. I'm
So, here we go, guys. It may surprise you to learn that from a very young age, William Luther Pierce III was already a very evil piece of shit. He happened to be born in Atlanta, Georgia, in November of 1933, and he inherited a noble pedigree from his mother's Southern family tree. Her ancestor was a guy named Thomas H. Watts, who was the Attorney General to the Confederacy and also the Governor of Alabama. So, I mean, we're looking at a deep South pedigree here.
Yeah.
Even as a child, Pierce was proud of this like slave-owning heritage, you know, this like the people that stood against the Americans who fought America and that stuff. Mrs. Pierce, not a loving mom, you know, very cold to her children. She is like, you know, dispossessed aristocracy, so like bitter to the end. And Pierce like absorbed that bitterness as well. When Pierce was 10, his alcoholic dad died in a drunk driving accident, so he goes to live with a relative of his mother's in Montgomery, Alabama, a man named Gaston Scott, who sounds like a guy left out of Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
Gaston Scott, who happened to be, at the time, the state highway commissioner of Alabama and, quote, a tough son of a bitch to live with. Scott kept in his house a black man, a convict that lived in his house and was effectively a slave. Who
Jesus Christ.
This slave would cook and valet and clean for him and little Pierce, little Billy boy.
So what year is this approximately? Like,
we're still here in the let's see, 33. He lived with him when he was about 10, so like 42ish, something like that.
Okay.
His father had been a government representative called. Oh wait, hold on a minute. See, he went to Yeah, 40s, something in the 40s, we'll say. All right, so his father had been a government representative called a supercargo. That was Bill's dad. He worked on cargo ships, advising the masters of these ships and then reporting stuff to the shipping board in Washington. That was his job. His dad had once published a story, though, in a compilation in 1924 called Ocean Tramps, in which the daddy Pierce recalls a mutiny on his ship where, quote, a gang of Chileans and Mexicans, dark mulattoes with scars across their faces, rebelled and tried to take the ship, which I think is just amazing casting for a mutiny. All of them, long scars on their faces. And I wonder if that's why they mutinied. If it literally all had fucking scarred up faces.
Yeah, there's probably a reason.
Probably a good cause here, yeah. So anyway, Dad murdered 2 of these people. It's not even his ship. He's like a government representative on the ship, and he shot a couple of these like striking mutineers dead with his pistol before the Uruguayan authorities finally boarded and arrested everybody. That is to say, didn't shoot everybody, arrested everybody. So William Pierce's dad almost certainly murdered 2 people for fun on this ship.
It's a time-honored tradition.
Oh, yes.
It's part of the country, I think.
Yeah. Little Pierce loved this story. More when he was like a young teenager. He kind of like started reading this when he was like 14 or something like that. So, all right. So you already got a perfect combination of things going on here. You've got landed aristocracy from the South, bitter over the end of the Civil War. You got him growing up with a literal slave in the house of his like fucking highway commissioner cop uncle or whatever. And then you've got his dad, whose like greatest story was when he murdered some mulattoes on a boat that he didn't even run. You know, that's our boy.
Yeah.
All right. So after his father died, his family was struggling. Like they really didn't have money. And I got to imagine that also led to him continuing to take the Civil War very personally. I mean, like he definitely saw himself as dispossessed gentry, as like some elite that was now on the bottom of the ladder for reasons that he had no control over. So he didn't.
Now
have
they
any
can
money.
only keep one slave instead of
Exactly. Yeah, they can't even call him a slave. You know, he's like a work release or something like that. So he didn't have any money, but he was a smart guy, and he was smart enough to go to Rice University in Houston on a scholarship. And his professors at the time, his physics professors, claimed that he was, quote, normal in all respects, had no bad habits, and his loyalty and patriotism were unquestionable, which is just the kind of peer review you want to hear from physicists. That's exactly the opinion that I want. Hey, physicist, how's your patriotism? Pierce's time at Rice was very formative, according to the fawning biographer, by the way, that he has. A lot of this episode mostly comes from a mix of like, there's not a whole lot of like monographs written about him, but there's a lot of FBI files, but there is one very complete biography, which is written by a guy that is very clearly a low-key white supremacist who teaches education. He's a professor of educational theory somewhere, but he actually met with Pierce and spent a lot of time with him, months with him, and wrote a very interesting account. So a lot of this is also from that.
There's a lot of biographical data in his son's book, which came out last year, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
called "Sins of My Father: Growing Up with America's Most Dangerous White Supremacist" by Kelvin Pierce. Yeah.
So Pierce is at Rice, and there he reads Hermann Ober's rocketry texts in German. He claims he sees the school patriotism at Rice as a good model for the rest of America. So he learned to be a fascist at Rice and interprets the increasing amount of Latin American students at Rice as evidence of an impending racial crisis. Right? So most importantly, according to his biographers, he attends a performance of George Bernard Shaw's play Man and Superman, which supposedly inspired his later cult called cosmotheism, which we are going to get to eventually. He obtained a vinyl record of the third and maybe most famous part of this play. It's a 3-act play, and often the third act is performed completely separately as its own thing. And the third act is called Don Juan in Hell, where the protagonist, whose name is Jack, is essentially held up by a Jewish bandit named Mendoza. So Jack falls asleep while in captivity, and he dreams that Mendoza, the Jew, is Satan himself. And he, Jack, is Don Juan, now in hell. And I've only read like a summary of this, but my understanding is this, that Don Juan and the Jewish Satan guy have a debate concerning the nature of heaven and hell, where Don Juan claims that the earth is already in a state of hell, and that in heaven you, quote, live and work instead of playing and pretending. You face things as they are, you escape nothing but glamour, and your steadfastness and your peril are your glory.
So wait, you have to work in heaven?
That's
fucking
right.
Sucks.
Heaven,
what the fuck?
yes, and we are now in hell, right? So you kind of see, though, right? This is a very compatible state of mind for like apocalyptic Nazis that Pierce will become.
Yeah.
So achieving this state on Earth is attaining what Shaw calls in this play the Godhead. And this will come after a mighty struggle in the battle against the forces of death and degeneration. That's the quote. It's really, this was interesting for me to read, it's very easy to see like these kind of siege pill types in this somehow. So now recall in the scene that Don Juan is actually Jack dreaming, right? Jack also dreams that his love interest / verbal abuse victim, Anna, is also in the dream speaking with the devil. And so at the end of the scene, the devil issues a warning to Anna. Says this: beware of the pursuit of the Superman. It leads to an indiscriminate contempt for the human. To which Anna responds, tell me, where can I find the Superman? He is not yet created. Not yet created? Well, then my work is not yet done. I believe in the life to come. A father for the Superman. Like, I don't know. So I'm pretty sure in the end, she wants to hook up with Jack to make the Superman, to be the mother of the Superman. But even in this play, Jack is like weird and different to her and is just a dick to her. And that's how it kind of ends, as far as I know. So this is really weird Nazi fantasy shit, this Bernard Shaw play. And it's worth noting that George Bernard Shaw, who is, by the way, one of the UK's like greatest literary minds, like they compare him to Shakespeare, like the modern Shakespeare. He was also an old school anti-vaxxer. He was a eugenicist. He deeply admired Hitler. He denounced the Nuremberg trials, but he also did like Stalin. He liked Stalin. That Stalin was a mensch. All right. So Pierce, though, got his bachelor's in physics from Rice in 1955, which is, remember, this is 1955. A BA in physics, a BS rather, is a very, very good thing to have. You know, I mean, that's it quickly got him a job at Los Alamos, working on a team to develop controlled nuclear fusion before going on to work at his master's at Caltech for a year. So this is serious shit, you know?
Right.
Like he goes from Rice University to Los Alamos to Caltech. In 57, he's working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that works with the state, where he met the first of his 5 wives that he will have, who was a mathematician named Patricia Jones. Coworkers at the time recall Pierce bringing Patricia around to the office now and then, and recall that she would like jump in anxiety at the sound of Pierce's voice. Like she would like leap in her chair and refer to him only as sir and never speak until she was spoken to directly. Like this is a woman that is suffering some very deep abuse here already, right? So Bill Pierce leaves the lab after a year, and in 58 he starts his doctoral studies at the University of Boulder, supported apparently by his wife's modest income as a math tutor. So his wife throughout this is going to be like, Pierce makes money, but he usually like throws it all away on Nazi shit. But throughout this thing, like while Pat's still around, she's kind of making the money while he's, studying for his next degree, etc.
Right.
So he wrote his dissertation on the atomic nuclei of crystals, for which he designed and built special equipment himself, got his doctorate in physics in 1962, and both of Bill's children, Kelvin included, are born that same year. Both go on, one of them goes on to be a programmer, Kelvin goes on to be like an aerospace engineer, much like his dad. Kelvin, as we said, breaks with this world way later in life, and writes like this huge book that we mentioned, etc. So, he's worth checking out. Calvin's like a regular okay person now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, from what I could
him a while.
gather, I mean, he was normal forever because he always kind of hated his dad, but he just refused to even talk about it or acknowledge any of this until like way later in his life.
Well, he also was, I mean, he grew up a Nazi. Like he grew up thinking blacks were not human. He grew up with what Bill gave him, But he got himself out of there. But Kelvin also says that like Bill beat the shit out of him all the time, was torturous, in fact, to his kids, and like throughout their life, like Kelvin would try to get his father's approval and never quite making it. And then finally, when he was like 39 or something like that, he finally like went to a therapist and got his shit together. And
Yeah, I mean, from what I
good for him.
understand, William Luther Pierce almost never expressed any kind of affection to them whatsoever. I mean,
right.
In his son's book, I mean, his mother recounts him never even really holding the children, like never really wanting to. The only thing that he would do even remotely close to childcare was sterilizing their bottles.
Wow.
And
Great.
like that's it. He like really didn't.
That was probably just because he didn't want to touch them if they were dirty.
Yeah, probably. I mean, he seemed to be like a complete like emotionless freak to his children.
Yeah, but you
And
know,
horrible.
like Bill's mom was to him. You know, it all goes back. But
Right.
when Kelvin was a newborn, though, that was the time that Bill was trying to find himself as a fascist. You know, he first joined the John Birch Society, and he left like pretty quickly because he felt they were soft on the race issue. Pierce believed that the climate of protest in the 1960s was, of course, a Jewish communist conspiracy to encourage the public to censor dissent for the state. So he thought that this is like his critique was like a cancel culture critique. That he thought that the entire point of the 60s was to engage normal people in the act of suppressing truthful statements about things like the Holocaust and Nazis. He's pretty much sure that this whole fucking thing was like a cover to teach people bad things about Nazis, which is, I don't recall it almost ever coming up in civil rights protests. So I recall a lot of Nazis showing up at civil rights protests, but I don't recall them being about Nazis. And of course, like Nazi historical revisionism was never banned in the U.S. To this day, it's not banned.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is he talking about? So the most diabolical scheme of the civil rights movement, however, was a subtle, almost imperceptible mission. Now remember, this is he found this out. You know, he discovered this. He decoded the civil rights movement and discovered that it was like a secret mission to integrate black people into society.
Wow.
He cracked the code. And he was like, it's amazing no one else knows this. So Pierce
I mean, you can
this
see
up.
why he's the smart Nazi.
Oh yeah, he's the smartest man in the room. People had to know, you know, that when people argued for equal rights to be a member of American society, that what they really wanted was to share political, social, and cultural spaces with white people. You know, he cracked the code. He knew it was up now. So Bill starts teaching at physics in Oregon State University on a tenure track. Like, this guy would have been a completely, totally successful physicist, right? There's nothing was standing in his way here. He recalls later that he had a colleague there at Oregon State University, though, that made a really big impact on him. Such a big impact that he talked about this throughout his life. And to his biographer, he mentions it multiple times throughout the months that they were together. So this coworker of his at Oregon State University married a quote mulatto woman, and you heard the story, right? Yeah, and had kids with this woman. And Pierce would sit there, fucking stare. He would go to this guy's house, you know, and he would stare at this man's children in confusion and disgust, and he thought that they were just ugly. And Bill said that he understood. He said, "I understood their father loved them, but I couldn't fathom how my colleague could feel any kinship to them." His own kids. He couldn't understand how his colleague felt kinship to his children.
Right, because he also felt such kinship to his own children.
Right, yes. Yeah. It's probably what he was thinking. Like, I don't even like my kid and he's white, you know? Yeah. Like Pierce brought these kids up several times in his life, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from what I read, like, he was very impressed by this colleague and liked him a lot. And then they had some, like, you know, faculty social function, and he found out that he had a black wife, and it like
mulatto wife, even worse, as we know from the
and that like freaked him out to no end. And even like, you know, they tried to be social with the family, like and called the house for like, you know, dinner parties because they clearly got along quite well. And, you know, he would freak out and tell his wife to tell them that we're busy and we can't do anything, whatever.
Yeah, amazing. Pierce, though, was very specific about his fear here. He says that he suddenly was gripped by fear that America would become, quote, another Brazil. So literally, America would become like the only country on earth that is mostly just famous for how hot they are. Like that's their number one claim to fame. That and amazing sportsmen, you know? And
Brazil's still insanely racist place.
Yes.
I mean, they outlawed slavery like way after the U.S. Confederates fled to Brazil and set up a community there because they could still own slaves.
Yeah. Yeah, and now, I mean, it's literally run by a fascist. So, like, what?
Yeah.
It's like everybody's hot and they're fascist. What's his problem? Pierce was deeply rattled, though, at the thought that Americans might might look more like Brazilians. You know, who would want that? Americans are famously beautiful people. so, so while teaching at Oregon State, some idiot gave Bill a library card. And he got deep into Spengler, of course, devouring the decline of the West. But he also kept going. Like, he read, I don't know these books. He read The Hour of Decision. He read Man and Technics. And he also read texts from this Nazi historian's lesser-known aphorisms. Like, he was really into Spengler. Total fanboy. He also got into this American historian named Brooks Adams, who was apparently like a less openly fashy version of Spengler, complete with the idea of the cycles of civilizational decay and like also a kind of a Faustian take on individualism. Pierce was particularly attracted to Adams' distinction between the economic man, we know this distinction from other fashy people, the economic man of material interest and the spiritual man of adventure and ideals. Of course, material interest always somehow applies equally to capitalists and anti-capitalists because they're concerned with capitalism, so they're materialists, right? And Bill also does this required Nietzsche reading that you'd expect of a future Nazi intellectual, and then finally he gets to Mein Kampf for the first time actually since his undergraduate days when he read it out of like curiosity, and now he like loves it. He identifies deeply with it. He believes that Hitler embodies Nietzsche's will to power, and also in this mix is Savitri Devi, who we talked about in our last episode at length. He loved The Lightning and the Sun, her book from '58, and Dietrich Eckhart's 1923 text, which is like he was a fucking Nazi dude early on, associated with Hitler personally, but he wrote an imagined conversation between himself and Hitler called Bolshevism from Moses to Lenin, which is a great title, which seems like the German answer to Ford's International Jew. Like, it came out around the same time it came out in Germany, you know what I mean? So this was like in the International Jew kind of wave, right, in Germany. So in 1963, Professor Pierce sees George Lincoln Rockwell getting his ass kicked on national TV, as he's wont to do, and he thinks to himself, this guy's the one. This is the man. So in 1963, which is also the year of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombings in Birmingham, Alabama, which killed some children and has a connection to Pierce later in his life. In the 1980s, for instance, the FBI would find that people connected to that bombing would later become members of Pierce's National Alliance. So there's like, he liked these kind of guys. So for now, though, Pierce is mostly just like a library Nazi. So despite trying and failing to join the Air Force back during the Korean War, he was too weird and lanky to be a pilot. Now that the Vietnam War is raging, despite like really wanting to like fight in Vietnam, he's very happy to get this 3A hardship deferment and manages to avoid the draft and all that. He leaves his job at OSU in 1965 and becomes a senior researcher at the Advanced Materials Research and Development Laboratory in the aerospace manufacturer Pratt & Whitney in Connecticut, where he worked for 1 year, making what would now be something like $128,000 a year by today's standards. So later in life, Pierce would, though, double his supposed salary because he would like to wax poetic about the great sacrifices he made for the movement, you know. His wife, Pat, again, doing a little bit better for herself as well at this point. She's teaching math to employees at General Dynamics, you know, like she's not nothing. Like, she's a smart fucking lady. She's a good mathematician, a good teacher, making some money. About a month before Pierce left Pratt & Whitney, there was a wildcat strike in the factory. And 1,000 picketers assembled in front of the facility, and Pierce, who again at this time is the senior materials researcher, a man with like DOD clearance, goes ahead and just fucking drives his car into the fucking picket, losing his antenna in the process. So like, luckily none of the workers were hurt, but unfortunately neither was Pierce, you know. So a month later, Pierce quit his job explicitly to become a better Nazi. I suppose at some moment he was trying to run down the striking workers in the car. Some moment when he was doing that, he probably had some epiphany. He realized he really was a Nazi, you know. Here I am trying to murder striking workers with my car. Maybe I'm a Nazi. So Pierce had been planning this publication for a while called The National Socialist World, which would embody a more like erudite take on Nazism, an attempt to take the movement into like a place of scholarship, you know. He would tell his coworkers that he had some friends in DC, we know who they are, and he was looking forward to working with them. And Yeah, so that, of course, was Rockwell and the American Nazi Party. So Pierce told his colleague, who, by the way, hated Pierce intensely and thought Pierce was unable to handle like even the basic complexities regarding life and society. This is what he would say to people. That the ANP, Pierce said the ANP was, quote, the wave of the future. In 1966, Pierce packs all his shit and heads to D.C. I don't know what Pat's doing right now. I think she follows him there into poverty because he can't do anything for himself domestically, you know. Pierce meets Rockwell, and they immediately become enamored with each other. Pierce also, at the time, is making use of the Yale Library now, and he starts farming racial demographic data from the 20s and 30s, which he found so profound that he asks Rockwell to help him publish a journal, which I think we talked about, called National Socialist Thought. Right? I think we mentioned that in maybe even the last episode.
I don't remember now.
So this was like the realization of this idea he had to make like a scholarly Nazi journal.
Right.
So the first issue contains Pierce's own like compacted version of Lightning in the Sun with Savitri Davies' like personal stamp of approval. Like he sent it to her, she approved it, he published it. Rockwell thought it was a bit dry. Wasn't for him. Rockwell is almost never dry. Rockwell prefers wet things. He prefers things in bottles.
Yes.
This was on a piece of paper. He can't drink that. What's he going to do with it? So the journal proved to be a failure despite entries from Colin Jordan, from Rockwell himself. And it didn't manage to garner much interest among this, like, you know, American fucking booze-guzzling, shirtless, wrestling community of Nazis that he was hanging out with, you know. Davy, however, Savitri, loved it. And she would hang out with Pierce a lot, crashing on their couch and stuff. They would talk all night, whatever. Bill, though, being a completely evil bastard, came up with a suitably evil bastard way of distributing this journal that nobody would read. So this is what he says.
When we got to the final stages of stapling and gluing all the covers and so on, we recruited all the little kids from neighboring farms. Free labor. They didn't know what it was all about, but they seemed to be having a good time. I remember one of the little kids, about 5 years old, was nicknamed Turd.
There you go. So Pierce's little network of little birds helped him get the second issue of National Socialist World out in 1966. And because of his expertise in printing and graphics, none other than John Patler, who we know very well at this point, Rockwell's eventual assassin, Burroughs' frenemy, etc. John Patler was assigned to work with him on this project. So Pierce and Patler, we've discussed this, fucking hated each other. Pierce called him an aggressive little turd, which makes me wonder if he just calls everybody turd, if the kid was actually called turd or not. I think he just called people turd.
Yeah.
So this is what. So Pierce later recalls like conversations he had with Rockwell about the situation.
Patler hates you, Rockwell said. Rockwell said Patler did not want this magazine produced because he looks upon it as a competitor to his own magazine, the one he edited called Stormtrooper. And it did turn out that Patler and I were in constant warfare during that time.
So Pierce didn't vibe at all with the rank and file of the ANP, and he saw most of them as basically like degenerate beasts, and Patler was the zookeeper.
We used to call Patler the animal trainer because he would gather the most defective people around him, the ones nobody else could put up with, and convert them into essentially his slaves by stroking them.
I just want to say here that we called the stroking way back in the Dan Burroughs episode. Yeah. You guys are fascinating.
Yeah, so I mean, from what I could gather, they didn't really, he didn't like them, but Rockwell was very happy to parade him around as like, you know, this intellectual that gave them this kind of air of legitimacy. And this specifically, you know, he would always mention that they have a rocket scientist. Yeah. You know, this is like, you know, really important to them that there's a smart guy that's also into this shit.
Yeah, that's how they tolerated poor Cale.
Yeah.
So the FBI opens up a file on William Luther Pierce here around this time, and comments that he, at least at this time, was proficient in the use of radio and electronics, but had no special knowledge of weapons or explosives. Okay. Which is, I'm only mentioning because, like, he's mostly famous for the Turner Diaries, which is all about, like, this kind of expertise and stuff. But they're just as they're getting to know him, Pierce is already getting increasingly dissatisfied with the ANP.
The sensationalist approach, the publicity stunts and so on, it just wasn't dignified. It looked foolish, and really, what we are about is no laughing matter. If you put on a show, as he was doing, calling yourself the American Nazi Party and waving swastika banners around in front of the White House, if you come on with an incendiary approach, most level-headed people, even if they think of themselves as National Socialists, are going to be hesitant to get involved with that kind of circus. Rockwell had gathered around himself a group of people who for the most part were quite defective in one way or another. They were cripples. Things were in constant chaos. One damn thing after another. People were fighting with each other and organizing mutinies. People had to be gotten out of jail. I thought to myself, I couldn't put up with this. I'm never going to do anything that is dependent on defective people like this. I've got to have normal, moral, capable people around me if I'm ever going to get anything done. That was the most important lesson that I learned from Rockwell. Do things in a way that will attract the kind of people you can work with.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, he did do things the way he wanted to, and nonetheless continued throughout his life to surround himself with these types of people.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what does that tell you? So, yeah, this is... And also, how is he complaining about fucking mutinies when he very likely plotted the assassination of Rockwell?
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, this is actually... He's talking about now around the summer of 1967, right, when someone takes a shot at Commander Rockwell. So Pierce, to his biographer, claims that Rockwell saw that it was Patler, and when the commander finally died in a foamy puddle of blood and washing powder in August, Pierce quickly blamed Patler, as did the court, despite Patler's lifelong denial, as we've talked about. So Bill is briefly made the interim leader of the ANP, which is now called the Socialist White People's Party, as we discussed in our Matt Cale episode, before they finally settle on Matt. Pierce claimed that he was never officially an ANP member, though. This is what he says, telling Rockwell that he thought all the Nazi shit was a theatrical joke, but he finally did officially join the NSWPP, which I guess we would call the National Socialist White People's Party, after the commander's assassination. So Pierce and Cale at that time got along famously, but Bill's closest ally was an ANP member that we've talked about at length as well, named Robert Lloyd. I mentioned Lloyd in, I think, the ANP shit show episode we talked about him, but it's important to see who Pierce thought was like a good representative of Aryanism in action, because he really hated almost everyone else in the ANP except for Lloyd. So Lloyd for him is like a good example. So let's look in for a minute into Lloyd here. So Pierce's biographer pathetically describes Lloyd as a, quote, soap opera handsome man. This is what this biography is like. Everyone is fucking cut and handsome and young and beautiful to this guy. He says that Pierce adored him, eventually making him the circulation manager of the National Socialist World, which he did publish, probably much to Patler's dismay, because this was a power struggle they had down there in the printing basement. So way back in 1965, before Bill joined the party, Lloyd was Rockwell's go-to blackface guy, right? So when the Mississippi Freedom Delegation decided to forcibly seat their delegates in D.C., Lloyd busted into the chambers in full blackface with some ridiculous, like, witch doctor getup, demanded to be seated as part of, like, the Freedom Democrats. He got, at this time, $100 fine and was told by a very annoyed security guard that he'd be shot and killed if he tried it again. He also threw, quote, tickets back to Africa at attendees of an NAACP banquet, and he joined a civil rights march dressed up like an ape. If he had, like, a YouTube channel today, I think he'd be, like, a hero of, like, these greasy basement trolls, you know, all over. Like, being like a disgusting troll has been part of the Nazi tradition in the U.S. for a very, very long time. He also tried and failed to deliver a box labeled, quote, emergency shipment of Vaseline to a gay rights convention. So I'm sure that the stormtroopers thought this was all hilarious, but I mean, can you imagine being like literally anyone else on Earth and seeing this idiot like do this shit? Making an ass out of himself and like all Nazis really at the same time over and over again in the most embarrassing way possible. You know, it's amazing that they didn't get Rockwell in office with this. I'm just amazed. Like their public relations game was like fucking on clearly. I don't know. Pierce thought Lloyd was a fucking genius. So that's Pierce. That's our smart Nazi. Anyway, so Pierce and the ANP tried to bury Rockwell, like we said, at Culpeper National Cemetery in this huge fiasco we covered in part 2, I think, of our ANP saga. And one detail, though, that escaped us in that episode that I didn't know was that Rockwell's fucking dead body in the hearse was almost run over by a train. Did you hear this?
Oh shit, no.
So basically, the soldiers were blocking the entrance to the cemetery because, like we said, they told them they could bury him there as long as they didn't come all dressed up like Nazis and do like a Nazi thing. And they were like, no, we're doing a Nazi thing. So the guards stopped the hearse from getting into the cemetery. But the entrance to the cemetery, there's a railroad track, and the hearse just idled on the railroad track until like a train very nearly hit it.
That would be so great if you'd have.
Yes, can you imagine? It's the perfect end. He would get assassinated twice by fucking Kale on these people. So so as we mentioned,
can you imagine the scene like of that happening and then them just staring at the train that's just like passing for 3 minutes? Like
it's like a 3 mile long freight train.
Yes.
It's the horn going off.
We were minutes away from that. Like, as far as comedic history goes, minutes away.
Well, I mean that the second Fuhrer of the Bund decapitated himself with a train. If
Right.
you remember correctly.
Yes,
It would have
that's
been
right.
kind
I
of
forgot about that.
fitting for like American Nazis.
Yeah, the joke was that his body was like frozen in a rigor mortis zig-heil without a head. Yes. All right. So, as we mentioned, they cremate Rockwell and Pierce becomes his caretaker of the ashes, right? So despite his claims that he only now saw fit to join the party, Pierce nonetheless is like deeply dissatisfied with this movement that he just now joined.
Nothing could really be done in the long run with the losers the organization was attracting. Motorcycle gang dropouts, ex-convicts, and so forth. So very soon I was suggesting to Kale that this business of Sieg Heil and swastika armbands and all that didn't cut it. We weren't making a movie, and we might as well dispense with the Hollywood stuff and make a better impression on the type of people we really needed to attract.
So Lloyd supports Pierce's vision here, right? But Kale, his old ally in the white power versus Aryan unity debate back in the day, hates it. And even before their probable coup had settled, there was already this like new battle in the leadership here. Yeah. So there's like really, I mean, it's like what the guy's ashes are still warm, and this like these people that had probably plotted something together to take leadership are now battling over leadership. The FBI on their part was sure that William Pierce would eventually take over the ANP. They were very sure of this. They called him the brains of the organization. The Bureau had already listed Pierce as armed and dangerous at the time. And apparently Pierce was making a lot of money on the side with a little business called Arms Co. Inc.
Okay.
Arms Co. Inc. Run out of Virginia, where he sold military weapons and some customization services to American gun nuts. So things were looking really good for Bill. At first, the sixth and what would be final issue of National Socialist World appeared in April of '68, and it promised to clean the ANP's ranks of criminals and psychopaths. But rumors began swirling around Pierce and Kale's possible role in Rockwell's assassination. So before another round of assassinations broke out, Pierce decides it's like time to pick up stakes and move on. But it takes him a while, though. Like he sort of like steps back, lets Kale take over, and like begins to like start looking for a way out, but it really takes a long time. So in the meantime, he accepts his role as the quote chief ideological officer for the National Socialist White People's Party, and he comes up with this idea in this time for a dedicated telephone line where recorded messages will play for callers, which will act as like regular sort of status updates for the party or like what's on his mind or hot takes on the news and stuff. So he became like, he was really comfortable here, I have to say. Like, it was called, and this is interesting, because he was on the Aryan unity side of the white power Aryan unity debate, right? Mm-hmm. This thing is called the white power message. So he had, at this point, at least, it appears as though he had taken on at least the white power messaging, even if he didn't really believe in the, you know what I mean? In
Right.
the substantial parts of this debate. Substantial, as far as they can be. Yeah, here's let's hear a couple clips from White Power, his White Power message service. So you would call a number, right, in the DC area, and you would hear this.
It is a world in which our government adopts an official policy of hostility towards the white governments in Rhodesia and South Africa and ships arms to the black cannibals trying to destroy these two nations.
Yeah. So some of these messages also seemed like commercials, though, for Armsco Inc.
So I'll tell you once again, arm yourselves, and I'm not just talking about a pistol to keep under your pillow at night. You should have at least a semi-automatic rifle with several hundred rounds of ammunition.
Available for a low, low price of $19.99 a month. Yes. And note here on this next one how enthusiastically he like reps the National Socialist White People's Party, even though like right now he claims that like his confidence in them is just utterly shaken, right?
The government is attempting to disarm white citizens, leaving them defenseless in the face of black attacks. Many white men and women in the Washington area have taken our recent advice and bought guns and ammunition for the protection of themselves and their families in the coming race war. Cha-ching. Even so, the average white person is unable to obtain some of the most effective and modern weapons for dealing with rampaging blacks. As a special service to the white public, the National Socialist White People's Party has located stocks of Negro-controlled equipment normally available only to the policemen and the military. These Negro-controlled devices include special-purpose riot guns and chemical mace, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. Negro-controlled devices.
Yeah.
Yes. They located the stocks, guys. Get ready.
So you know that the federal government was very tolerant to black radical groups arming themselves. They didn't, kill them.
It's not
large
like
numbers.
all fucking... The first time we ever had like actual gun laws was when black people got guns.
Yes.
Yeah. So... As Pierce is moving increasingly away from the NSWPP, let's turn now to veteran American fascist Willis Carto, right? We promised a little bit of Carto, and here it is. So, meanwhile, this is a meanwhile, parallel to Pierce's path. Willis Carto has a long-standing organization called the Liberty Lobby, who throughout the 20th century would just be a really big influence, a terrible one, in fact. It gave us, like, the institutional backing for Holocaust denial through the Institute for Historical Review. I mean, give us a lot of crazy shit. Carto had formed a little group at the time called Youth for Wallace that was there to support George Wallace's doomed presidential campaign in 1968. As Pierce tells it, Youth for Wallace was basically a money-making scheme for Carto. Yeah, essentially building up financial contributions at the end of Wallace's run, knowing that he's not going to fucking, come on. Like, it's at the end. And takes all that money, uses it to establish the National Youth Alliance, which is a kind of a campus-oriented, like Turning Point USA style fascist response to the growing number of left-wing students and student groups and stuff. So Carto hired Louis just the mission statement of this. I didn't write it down, but I remember it. It's this like so much of it is about like how students are using drugs. Like it's the crankiest old man shit ever.
They're smoking dope.
Exactly. That's really They're smoking dope and they're communists, and that's like he makes. God damn, I wish university was like these people think it is. So Carto hires a guy named Lou Byers to run this thing, who uses the Youth for Wallace mailing list, and he sends out hundreds of thousands of fundraising letters and amasses like a notable on-campus presence. The people that they have to do this thing, they're pretty funny. Like some of the more famous ones, there's this guy, I don't remember his name, but he's just fucking like absolute degenerate fucking skinhead piece of shit type guy. This is, before, that kind of thing. But like that kind of guy, the kind of guy you'd expect to see in C-18 today.
Right. So a meathead Nazi.
Total meathead. Yeah. This guy never even graduated high school. And he's there on college campuses talking about all the leftism in college classes and stuff like that. Then he was one of their like main dudes, So it seems like for the most part, the conservative students who joined the National Youth Alliance, which we'll call the NYA probably, were totally unaware that this thing was a Nazi front. Like this is a bit like America First in this way. It's kind of a similar model in a way. This became very clear in January of '69, however, when the National Youth Alliance Leadership Conference happened at a motel in Pennsylvania. So remember, like the overwhelming majority of these students are just like dorky conservatives who are mad about all the drugged up socialists in their history classes.
People that probably wore like suits to class.
Oh, definitely. These are definitely suit to class guys. Yeah. So So the morning they all show up at this conference. The morning session of this conference is run by the Liberty Lobby president, which is a completely symbolic position. I don't remember the guy's name. And then the evening session is run by Carto himself, who lectures at length about Francis Parker Yockey, and then brings in people from the Francis Parker Yockey movement, who basically like talked about Yockey forever. Yockey was a personal idol of Carto's. Carto adored Yockey. So other speakers that came in were like lawyers and doctors and businessmen from the area who all took on like code names praising Yockey. And it's unclear how much of the lecture got through to the students because most of them, I imagine, were pretty distracted already when they walked in by all the fucking Nazi flags and Nazi war relics that were like decorating the fucking conference room of this motel. Like they walk in ready for like some fucking like Mitt Romney type shit, and they end up with like, you know,
like swastikas everywhere.
Fucking swastikas everywhere, yeah. So, and also at the time when they walk in, fucking Horst Wessel-Lied, Horst Wessel-Lied is like the Nazi anthem, is blaring over the speakers. So I guess a few of them must have had their like, "Are we the baddies?" moment then, and they got the fuck out of there, writing immediately to like the FBI. And others attempted to wrestle control. They stayed some to try to get control of the NYA from Carto, who politely reminded them that he fucking owned it. Like it was, you know, and it's a business and they're his employees. Fuck off. So, and it's a registered political association with this thing called Action Associates. That's the umbrella organization. One young conservative named John Accord calls the cops a couple months later, saying that Carto broke into their offices and made off with, like, stole an entire filing cabinet, like carried it out. He didn't press any charges, of course. And Carto then goes ahead and officially changes the NYA mailing list so that all of the correspondences and money that were going to the NYA now go directly to the Liberty Lobby. So the final conservative holdouts go to the post office to complain about this. But they decide that at that time, there's no way they can afford a legal battle against the Liberty Lobby. And they, quote, decide to surrender to a superior force. So later, all these dumb suits would claim that only 2 of their 17 regional national officers supported the Nazis in the NYA. And that's all it takes, you know. Yeah. Seriously, though, these conservatives are complete idiots. And this is what the news reported on what was the internal program. So they got a program, right, for this conference. And this is what the program said. This is a news report. The program read, speakers, marching music, display of European war relics, refreshments, bring your own bottle, exclusively for marching patriots, destiny thinkers, and culture bearers. At the bottom was a neo-Nazi slogan, Was mich nicht umbringt, macht mich starker, which means what does not destroy me makes me stronger. And they were like surprised when they walked in. So it's not like there weren't signs, you know. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention an old friend of the show, the most palindromic of all Nazis, Revelo P. Oliver.
Yay! I was wondering if Revelo was going to make an appearance soon.
A name which means Nazi freak no matter which direction you read it from.
Yeah.
Carto got Oliver to make a special promotional film for the NYA to be shown to these fucking conservatives, calling on students to reject the wimpy, feminized society of free enterprise and comfort to become willing warriors ready to die at the pass of Roncesvalles, which was an 8th century battle between Charlemagne and the Basques. I know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like most of those conservative students literally just wanted to be like business executives.
Oh, that's all they want. This is like networking for them. Yeah, yeah. So by May of '69, New York's most read tabloid at the time, called the Daily News, published an insane ad on their own accord. Like they wrote it for the National Alliance in their youth paper. And it says this: to our younger customers, if you're looking for a patriotic organization which is the exact opposite of the down with everything SDS, get in touch with the National Youth Alliance. That's their own editorial opinion here. So the Suffolk News Herald was shocked by this, and they sent a letter to the editor of the Daily News telling him that the NYA is in fact a neo-Nazi group, and that if he didn't print a retraction, they would write their own story about Daily News promoting a neo-Nazi group. The editor responds like this: go ahead and print the story and be sure to use my name if you got the guts. drops, So they do, of course, and like a couple weeks later, the Daily News quietly drops the endorsement and like pretends it never happened. So that's all right. So that's what's happening now with the National Youth Alliance and Carto. We don't need much. It's Pierce is still in the ANP at this point. So Pierce, meanwhile, is engaged in the usual childish ANP pranks that he claims to hate. So in the summer of '69, the stormtroopers go on a spree of stink bombings. And they stink bomb films like Slaves and Vixen and Sidney Poitier's The Last Man, as well as like some film on Che Guevara. That's what they're doing. Basically, any film showing race mixing, they'll stink bomb. They would also pretend to be Jews. They would dress up in what they thought were like Jewish clothes. They would go into neighborhoods that they identified as experiencing some kind of racial demographic change, and they would promote race mixing in like absurd public displays dressed as Jewish people. This is what Pierce is up to. Pierce himself is mixing the stink bombs. Like he personally is making the stink bombs. So you can't say like this is like something the kids were doing and he was working on the National Socialist Journal and whatever. No, he was making stink bombs for the kids.
He's a serious physicist, goddammit.
That's right. That's right. So all the while, Pierce still has his local DC number with the helpful white power messages. And in December of 1969 now, callers would be treated to a gem like this. Every Negro in D.C. must be shot for the murder of the girl who was killed on the Catholic University campus. Like that's the kind of stuff you started hearing now. Some other pearls of wisdom from around this time that came from his FBI file include this.
Now it is no longer possible to avoid violence and bloodshed on a massive scale. We are in the first stages of a genuine race war. Race war, however, is a small price to pay if we can safeguard the future of our race. If, through race war, we can eliminate the menace of race mixing.
There you go. Yeah, that's one. Here's another hit.
The decent white people in this country have just about had their fill of lies and hypocrisy and treason from the politicians. They're not going to put up with it forever, and when the political prostitutes who are now running America are dragged out of the Congress and the Supreme Court and the White House one day and swung from lampposts all over Washington, we'll hear them squealing that they didn't really mean to betray their nation and sell out their rights all these years. Only the rope will choke off their lives.
Yeah, right. So we're like about a half a decade still, or maybe a little more, from the day of the rope, the Turner Diaries. But he's already talking about the rope. He's talking about swinging congressmen from lampposts and all that. And by the spring of '69, he's just straight up calling for siege-style revolution.
Yeah.
Wake up, America. We're at war. This is the time to be stocking up on ammunition for your firearms, not looking for new ways to strengthen your enemies, but stamp out this liberal insanity and black rebellion with a white man's revolution in America.
And in case you were confused about this message, this message that Boris just read there, or rather William Pierce just read, was it made a splash. He's openly calling now for something like a white man's revolution. So in order to clear up some confusion about this, he leaves another white power message.
On these white power messages, you've heard me call for a white man's revolution in America. You have heard me say that we ought to organize and take up arms and put a final end to black terror and Jewish degeneracy and liberal treason in this country. I guess a lot of you thought I was exaggerating, that I was just saying those things to shock people. Well, let me assure you that when I tell you it's going to take bullets, not ballots, to cure America's problems, I couldn't be more serious.
Yeah. So many of his other messages concern Jewish control of the government, and as a consequence, Pierce sought to attach himself at this time to the Palestinian cause. And a few years later in '73, he would often attend pro-Palestine student rallies against the war. And so he and his eventual followers in the National Youth Alliance, this is later now, we're jumping ahead a bit, we'll come back in a second, this is like '70s now, would take a cue from the ANP and paint out very large picket signs and mix anti-occupation messages with anti-Semitic slogans, doing a lot actually to legitimate the idea that those who oppose the occupation are anti-Semites, right? These guys literally are. Unlike Rockwell, Pierce didn't fuck around with swastikas and uniforms at that time. He wanted to look at all times like a modern and legitimate organizer. That's all later, though, in 73. So right now, though, 3 years before all that, this is around 1970, 69, something like that, he's still dragging himself out of bed to attend stupider and stupider ANP shit. So as late as April of 1970, Pierce was seen in a very old school ANP march with armbands and everything, carrying signs that read, Marxism is Jewish. But that's kind of towards the end here. Like, that's probably one of the last public displays you would see him at, where like that regular Nazi shit was going on. Pierce, though, also took a page out of Rockwell's book and tried to speak on university campuses, but he didn't do quite as well as the commander. So in what I think is now my third or fourth reference to The Office since we started talking about the ANP, Bill went to Scranton, Pennsylvania, to try to win over listeners at the University Student Center there, calling for the president to be dragged out of the office and shot. So the FBI reported on this event and stated that there were about 450 students in attendance there, and they all spent the entire evening in just fits of uncontrollable laughter at Pierce's speech. So he's not really. I mean, I'm sure they were like that with Rockwell too. I mean, he was also like a
but
a novelty.
Rockwell was like a showman. Like know, he could put on a show. He knew what he was doing.
No, they thought Pierce was fucking pathetic. Like they were,
Well, because like Pierce is like the nerd that from campus that is now trying to lecture you on like being a Nazi and shooting people. It's not what they want. It's not, it doesn't have, it's not as theatrical and interesting.
Also, like probably in like 69 and 70, it probably at that point, it sounded a little like mundane. No, I mean, oh, another one of these guys. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, this one's a Nazi.
The novelty wore off.
Well, no one's shocked by this, Yeah. Really, the FBI is probably listening the closest to this, and and also other people who are already like Nazis.
Right.
So in July of 1970, the Justice Department had I don't know, was getting annoyed with this, with these like increasingly unhinged white power messages. And the Justice Department considers prosecuting Pierce as the leader of the National Socialist White People's Party. Not quite right, but for a broadcast which said something like this. There's only one way to win a war, and there's only one way to deal with a traitor. You kill him. McGovern, Fulbright, Hatfield, the whole rotten bunch need a bullet right between the eyes. So the charge at the time would have been a federal violation against using interstate commerce facilities to transmit a threat, right? And this carried a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $1,000 fine. But for unknown reasons, although very possible to hypothesize about, the Justice Department never follows through on this, never goes through it. Meanwhile, the FBI file that I'm reading around this time begins to get increasingly more redacted. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. So Pierce and his band of idiots loses a hilarious court battle that same month. This is like the end for him. After this, he's just pretty much finished with the ANP. They lose this court battle against a local school board member in Virginia. So what happened was the ANP, whatever, wanted to celebrate Hitler's birthday in a town schoolhouse, in like an elementary school, and the board refused this, of course. So a bunch of stormtroopers show up at this board member's house, and they threaten him, and they make a big scene, and they destroy some of his property. And then 6 of them, again, 6 members of the ANP is like a quarter of the ANP, at best, when they're at their height. 6 of them get arrested and thrown in jail with like a big fine for unlawful conduct. So that was like so he, so ruminating over another completely senseless defeat, Pierce sees Lou Byers, the guy that Carto tapped to run the National Youth Alliance, right? He sees him on TV, and Byers meets him and tells Pierce that he's thinking about cashing out of the National Youth Alliance and folding up the organization, which he made some money off of, but the organization itself was $1 million in debt because, Carto and fucking Byers had it all. So Bill excitedly offers to snatch up the National Youth Alliance from him. Not to snatch up the actual business, because that's insane, because it's hugely in debt and falling apart. But they're going to let the National Youth Alliance fall apart, and then Pierce is going to start a brand new organization legally with the exact same name, using all of Byers' connections and mailing lists and all of that. So Pierce isn't familiar with Byers' boss, Willis Carto, yet. He doesn't know him yet. And he later admits that he never even read Yockey's Imperium. He doesn't care about Carto, not that much. He doesn't really care about Yockey that much. What Pierce wanted, though, out of this was an empty vessel that was already more or less located in an elegant place, Like he's been in the zoo for so long, he now wants to pretend to be a person again. So he misses university life. He wants like a scholarly Nazi movement. Pierce thought that the NYA was like a perfect counterpoint, perhaps even a turning point, USA, you might say, to a student culture, which he said showed that it was cool to show disrespect for authority and ridicule tradition and do drugs. Interesting side note, though. Some story in the Washington Observer later claimed that Byers was somehow a double agent for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. I don't know about this. Maybe a listener can fill us in on that if somebody knows more about this connection. But anyway, in 1971, William Pierce starts a new corporation called the National Youth Alliance. Brand new. Not like the old National. Don't get confused. Same mailing list, same name. Same people in it, but not the same. I don't owe you any money, is what we're saying. Despite being like a legally, completely unique entity, Lou Byers' name is still on the letterheads. He's not even really in it anymore, but they use his name still on the letterheads of their publications and correspondences. Pierce is listed, however, as the director. Apparently with the help of a stolen Liberty Lobby mailing list, which would eventually split Pierce and Carto completely, even though they were never really tight. Byers and Pierce begin to assemble an advisory council, including a Navy Admiral and vice presidential candidate for the National States Rights Party, good old Bomb Run John Crommelin, and a creepy fucking secret Nazi who we talked a little bit about in our little side chats that we have, named General Pedro de Valle. Do you remember seeing his name pop up?
I don't know if you mentioned him.
He was
familiar.
We not on the show. We were just talking about him on the side.
He was friends with Rockwell. Yeah.
Yeah. He was also like a very suspicious guy. Like this is he like rescued Nazis from Italy even before Gladio started doing it, you know. He very likely had intelligence connections. He was a Marine Corps Lieutenant General guy. Big deal. So you've got like a Navy Admiral who's a vice presidential candidate. You've got this Marine Corps Lieutenant General, and of course, no advisory council would be complete without that old classics professor from the University of Illinois, Revelo. Welcome to the palindrome, Oliver. Yeah.
Yay.
Clearly not in awe as they ought to be at this blinding pantheon of towering intellects, the FBI pretty much assumes that the NYA is just another financial scam once again, but they keep tabs on it, especially on Pierce. Throughout the summer of 71, Pierce dumps everything into this project. He sleeps on the couch in his office. He only sees his kids and wife on the weekend, which I assume is a great relief to everybody in that family. Pierce was, again, like we said, a viciously abusive father, so I'm sure they didn't mind that he was like deep in this thing now. Although he wasn't making any money really, and Pat was wearing the pants. So I want to tell you, so Bill is also up to some other things on the side here. He opens up a bookstore that he ran called Western Destiny Bookstore. And from there, he begins to manufacture incendiary devices for like packs of 2 for about $8 and supplies them to whoever wants to buy them. But these are mostly like neo-Nazi types that he's like advertising through the white power messages, right? So in 72, the FBI is aware that Pierce is not only ordering dangerous chemicals, but he's also publishing instructions on their use as weapons in his new column called Revolutionary Notes in the National Youth Alliance's new magazine, Attack! With an exclamation point. So now the FBI, very aware of this. From about this point, however, like I mentioned, FBI documents get thinner and thinner and thinner, and it's less clear what he's doing through them. So while Pierce is apparently arming the next generation of Aryan soldiers in secret, he's also trying to walk this like slightly straighter and barely narrower path towards a mass youth movement. Unshaken by his failure a couple of years back to appeal to university students, Pierce heads right back into the university for round 2, right? He got laughed at by 450 students, but that was a year ago. Things have changed. So he goes back and goes to the George Washington University, like the University Center in George Washington University, to about 15, quote, angry Jewish supporters in a closet-sized conference room in February of 1972. So they two now. So this was really well published. Like the student newspaper ran a really hilarious article about this. So one attendee was heard to joke at the beginning, I think there's enough for a minion now, which I thought was funny, as others gave Pierce Jewish power badges and heckled him as he tried to explain why the NYA was, quote, not a rightist organization. But he can barely get through a sentence of this explanation before someone shouts, "Sit down, you son of a bitch!" And another person says, like, "You ugly bastard!" from the back of the thing. So Pierce tries to recover, but some old man in the back of the room pushes up to the front and shoves this umbrella point right into Pierce's chest and says to get the fuck out of here. And so Pierce like scoffs at this old man and does this like, "What are you going to do about it?" kind of thing, when suddenly a barrage of eggs fly through the air and cover Pierce in egg and slime and stuff like this. And then somebody else sets up a stink bomb and blows it up next to Pierce. So he got stink bombed. He got hoisted by his own petard, I believe you call that. And so everybody evacuates the room except for Pierce and some asshole named Doug Allen who introduced him, who calls security. And as he's calling security, the students are out there in the hallway where it's not stinky anymore, and they keep like kind of like opening the door a little bit and throwing more eggs in, and like closing the door and tossing more in. So the campus though has like very mixed feelings about this. A lot of people really loved it. Some people thought it was like a travesty of free speech or whatever. You know how it goes. So the for instance, like the Jewish Defense League thought it was terrible. No, sorry, the Jewish Defense League took credit for it. The Jewish Activist Front denounced it. So this is kind of the dynamics in here. So most people seem to think that it was basically just hilarious, though. So regardless of whether or not it was politically fine, there was a cartoon that we'll put on our Twitter for sure that just shows Pierce just like covered in eggs, and there's like he's like stylized as Hitler. There's like a swastika banner behind him, also dripping with egg, and the caption reads something like, "Adolf, it's not the same anymore." And there's a couple of bugs for some reason in either corner. And one of them says like, "Neo means new." And the other bug says, "Has it changed?" Which I think the whole thing implies that what Pierce showed everybody is that the neo in neo-Nazi just means lame, like lame Nazi. So eventually Pierce would win a lawsuit. Well, he wouldn't win the lawsuit. Sorry. He settled a lawsuit against George Washington University for damages, who paid him an undisclosed sum of money. Nobody knows how much it was. But Pierce initially asked for millions of dollars for this. So I don't know what their settlement was, but I'm guessing it wasn't small. So I guess to make himself feel better after this egging, Pierce goes right up to Toronto to visit the Western Guard and write something for their paper called Straight Talk, suggesting that the U.S. should carpet bomb Vietnam and destroy the system and yada yada. You get it. So
as if they weren't already doing that.
Yeah, I know. What the fuck?
I mean, they were literally carpet bombing Vietnam.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He'd also gotten his own like attack magazine off the ground, you know. But it's earning like $4,000 a year, this magazine. The first issue alone, I should say, earned $4,000. And the opening issue asked these like pointed questions, you know. Like I think one of them was why doesn't anyone shoot Jane Fonda? I think that was the title of one of their opening things. So you also get gems like this.
We do not need to reason with the monster. We need to put a bullet into its brain and hammer a stake through its heart. If that means blood and chaos and battling the alien enemy from house to house in burning cities throughout our land, then by God, it is better that we get on with it now than later.
All right. So who wouldn't love that, you know? Who wouldn't be hip to that?
Well, James Mason certainly loved that.
Of course.
You can see why.
So that was like spring. So let's hear one from the fall.
We must think in terms of assassinating federal judges or burning the stores of businessmen who act as if they are more interested in what's good for business than what's good for white America, and dynamiting the TV transmitters.
So remember that, by the way, for the next Pierce episode that we're going to do. Dynamiting TV transmitters in general. They're going to come back. All right.
And newspaper presses of the alien news manipulators, of harshly punishing whites, male or female, who fraternize sexually with the non-whites, and putting the fear of terrible retribution into every treacherous politician and system-serving editor, advertiser, bureaucrat, or other public person.
All right. Yeah, now we're really getting into it. You know, we're rapidly heading towards the Turner Diaries. So along with the revolutionary notes that I mentioned before that were in attack, they copy pasted like survival manuals and explosive recipes and like weapons specs and all this kind of stuff. It was like a gun nut kind of thing, alongside like Pierce's like usual rants, like we just heard. But this made Attack like super popular. You know, it was like a really cool, like aggressive, militant underground paper. And,
practical, hands-on.
That's right.
Thing.
That's right. Yeah. And Pierce is making enough money off of the NYA and Attack that he manages to buy shares of McDonnell Douglas, which is a big aerospace manufacturer, right? Solely. He buys shares in this solely to attend a shareholders meeting and put forward the motion that the firm should cancel its military contracts with Israel. So the motion, believe it or not, is not carried. Apparently they want to make money. And sadly, Pierce was forced to continue to accrue wealth from these shares. As the Israeli military contracts continued to dump money in. So this is where Pierce does that ostensibly pro-Palestinian shit. That's when he really picks it up here, you know, joining these rallies and stuff like that. He actually joins one that was set up by the National States Rights Party. And the FBI confirms that Pierce and the National States Rights Party were very close working relationship. So around the same time, the Suffolk News Herald, who I mentioned before, does this big expose on the NYA and Pierce, calling them a neo-Nazi group and criticizing their tax-exempt status as like a whatever it is, a political association. They say that Pierce was in effect being paid through these tax exemptions $310 for every 10,000 pieces of hate mail that he sends out, and we're talking like hundreds of thousands. You know what I mean? So like, it's a good expose, you know. So in February of the next year, Pierce starts the National Alliance. Now this organization continues to this day to spew out insane Nazi garbage, right? This is probably one of the most enduring Nazi organizations almost anywhere, right? And they kept the NYA, the National Youth Alliance, as a youth group for members who were under 30. But I mean, anybody could join the NA. You didn't have to be over 30 to join or anything. The NYA is basically defunct at this point, more or less. So again, Pierce names good old Revilo Race Car Oliver to the board of directors, who surprises Pierce one day and asks him if he'd considered ever writing fiction. Pierce admits that he has, but he didn't believe he had any of the skills necessary to tell a good story. He's correct about that. Oliver tells him it's very easy to write stuff. And to check out some book called the John Franklin Letters. Not the Turner Diaries, but the John Franklin Letters, published back in 1959. So the biographer of Pierce figures out, to his credit, that the actual author of this is in fact Oliver, that he wrote under a pseudonym. The name is crazy. It's something like, it's something Ogdan. It's something Ogdan. I assume it's Nodgo Ogdan. That's my guess. But he doesn't admit this to Pierce that he wrote this, right? So now we haven't quite covered the Turner Diaries yet. That's going to be on our Patreon. We're going to do a big old dose of Earl Turner in the next premium episode. But if you even have like a vague understanding of this book, like the themes of the John Franklin Letters should sound very familiar. All right. So Oliver's John Franklin Letters is a collection of letters. Not diary entries, letters, different, from a guy named John Semmes Franklin to his nonagenarian uncle between 1972 and 1974. So remember, this book is written in 1959, right? So it's a series of letters from the near future.
I mean, at the time, Oliver was Revilo guy was still a member of the John Birch Society, right?
Yeah.
But again, he also left the John Birch Society much for the same reasons that Pierce did, right?
Yeah. He was,
They weren't racist and
too Nazi.
militant enough, yeah. All right, so far we got a collection of letters about the near future. The Turner Diaries, in total contrast, is a collection of diary entries about the near future. Totally different thing. The Turner Diaries, the protagonist is named Earl Turner, and he's a member of an organization called The Organization, which was the inspiration for the real-life order later on in the 1980s. Oliver's book, like totally different, concerns a man named John Franklin, right? And his interest in a group called the Rangers. He's a member of the Rangers. And I found this very interesting because William Potter Gale and Wesley Swift had the California Rangers in 1963. And very similar ideas to the way that they presented them in this book, similar organizational structures and everything, combating socialistic government policies, destroying the country, that kind of thing, worried about them taking the guns and all that. So I don't know how popular the John Franklin letters were in that generation of Nazis, but it seems really possible to me that like potentially the entire militia movement might owe something to this book. So it might be worth a closer read. So Attack is doing great. Like I said, Pierce manages to get 10 fucking vending machines in DC to distribute it publicly. You could go out and like pull out the news vending thing and pull out a copy of Attack for like for a quarter or something. And most of these, by the way, are on K Street, which if you don't know is where all the lobbyists are. So in March of 1975, Pierce writes the first chapter of the Turner Diaries, finally, on the advice of Race Car. And he publishes it in this magazine under the name Andrew MacDonald. And it's a huge hit. He's getting a lot of press coverage at the same time for various stunts, like he lays a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier of the Revolutionary War, you know, and it's like, neo-Nazi, blah, 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 Revolutionary War. And for protest signs that he had that said stuff like, nuke Hanoi or get out now. As well as demonstrations against the new attorney general who happened to be Jewish. Pierce is, again, like high on the hog, but it doesn't last very long. And we're rapidly getting to like the end of this episode. So meanwhile, Pierce holds a very significant meeting in D.C. With a guy named Redacted, as well as Redacted and Redacted. And although even Redacted was there, who said, he was quoted here as saying redacted. Oh. And that's all according to the FBI file. So from this point on, this sort of becomes like the norm for their files. Apart from this, you see some replies in the FBI files that they made to like angry and concerned citizens and organizations calling on the FBI to like fucking do something about these Nazis, or at least tell them how they should handle it. And the replies were almost universally all the same. And it was something like, sorry, we can't infringe on the free speech rights of citizens and we can't offer any help or advice. That's basically what they said to everybody. So at the same time, Pierce is coming to the FBI directly to complain about threatening letters that he would get. And one in particular I really liked because it was scrawled on a copy of Attack in like red marker. And it said this, garbage is bastards with complex of inferiority without family life, poor pigs. Which I love, but he was terrified. Awesome. Pierce sent this to the he went to the FBI with this in hand and was like, what are you gonna do about this? And they were like, keep us posted. So this high was a very short one for him. Suddenly people just stopped coming to meetings. Pierce had been holding regular Sunday meetings, but they were increasingly poorly attended and started resulting in financial losses for the National Alliance. Like he would actually lose money whenever he would have like a big rally now. Finally, Pierce just discontinues them all in April and focuses all of his attention on Attack and developing the diaries of Earl Turner. And I'm not sure if it's the first appearance or the second one, but in the spring of 75, Earl is already in Attack drawing up detailed plans of how to bomb the FBI building in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, Pierce somehow starts selling, surplus NASA equipment for extra cash. He's got like a side business selling stuff from NASA. I don't know what the fuck's going on here. I don't know, fuck you, FBI. Like, they did nothing for us here. Nothing. Except maybe, like, you know, help encourage one of America's worst Nazis. So I want to end this here with the FBI, right? This is how we're going to end this episode. So basically, at this point, Pierce has made, let's just sum it up. Let's tally up the total. He's made important enough connections in DC to invite, like, a redaction that is now 30 years old, you know? He's selling explosives. He's selling guns. He's selling NASA equipment. He's publishing plans to attack federal buildings. He's publishing bomb recipes. He's making bombs and selling them for $8. He's publishing survival tactics stuff. He has ties to the NSRP. He's got ties to the Klan. He's being mentored by Revelo Oliver, who has been probably in more of our episodes even than David Myatt at this point. Maybe they're close to equal, or they're getting there. Yeah. And now in his like 42nd issue of Attack, this is a long-running paper, he runs a front-page article calling for the execution of John Stanley Pottinger, who's the chief Justice Department's Civil Rights Division chief. Yeah, calling him, by the way, a satanic pedophile and supposedly exposing his plans for white genocide. Yeah, so you got all that, right? This is what we're doing here. He's like a fucking Nazi supervillain with a white cat, you know, plotting the destruction of the world, making weapons, selling weapons. What does the FBI do about it? Well, a couple months after the satanic pedophile let's kill John Pottinger thing, like 2 months after that, and also inundated with letters pleading with them to do something about him, they close the entire investigation down. That's it. Nothing to see here. Move along. Over the next few years, they will continue to respond to cops and journalists and NGOs and regular citizens with the following sentence. William Luther Pierce III has committed no illegal acts or overt actions which could deprive persons of their civil rights under the Constitution, laws, or treaties of the United States or Alexandria. The FBI is conducting no further investigation. He's done nothing wrong.
No, I mean, that's a note to people. Don't rely on the FBI.
Hey,
what the
how about
fuck?
that? Yeah.
They're not there to help.
Yeah, I mean that's it. Like that's the episode really. Like they shut down the investigation just in time for him to write the Turner Diaries, and then they keep it closed until the order forces them basically to open it up 10 years later. So, like I said, like in the next premium episode, we're going to go through the Turner Diaries, maybe a little bit about Hunter. We'll see, and then we'll pick up part 2 of William Pierce and really get into the National Alliance on next Monday.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Yeah, what a fucking shithead.
What a shithead. Did nothing wrong.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. So they give the different accounts. So his reason for criticizing Cale was that he was too overtly Nazi, so he wasn't into that, or
when I don't get a lot from Pierce specifically about Cale. I'm sure it's there and I just didn't see it, but generally speaking, Pierce's idea is that Cale would have been too much in that Rockwell theatricality side. Although that kind of stands in contrast to what we talked about.
Yeah.
Where Cale was on this like monastic spiritual journey, you know?
Yeah, and
which,
he himself criticized Rockwell for that. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So I don't know, but also like we also know from an earlier episode that Pierce was also against this whole white power thing. And what does he do? He starts the white power messages, which he runs for a really long time, 10 years or something.
Yeah, and his son, I think, recalls in the book like finding white power buttons, and he wore one to school, got beat up by all the black kids.
Yeah. Yeah, Kelvin, I really feel for him.
When we say that he was against the white power thing, that means that in internal debate in the American Nazi Party, there were those like Rockwell who wanted all people who were by that time perceived to be white in America to have a common Nazi front. And there were the old school Nazis like Cale and Pierce who were not considering South Europeans or Slavs to be white. So they were called the Aryan Unity faction by some people who wrote about them. Yeah. So it's not like that he had a critique of white power.
No, right. Sorry.
No, absolutely not.
I meant he was Aryan
white power
unity.
was too inclusive for him. Yeah.
That's what it was. Yes. Thank you. I mean, as you can see, he's a very exclusive kind of guy. At least he thinks he is. He likes to be seen that way. But I mean, we can see like he's making fucking stink bombs.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, him being against the theatrics of the American Nazi Party is funny because that's what attracted him to the American Nazi Party in the first place.
Exactly right.
Because I mean, he was like across the other side of the country looking at their like stupid theatrical displays, and then that inspired him so much that he dropped his promising career in like aerospace to become a Nazi. Like there was never a point in which they weren't doing that stuff. That's what attracted him to it in the first place.
Well,
so
I guess when
it's all bullshit.
There, actually, probably he was embarrassed because he seems like quite an introvert person, and also probably a lot like he was probably annoyed by those people there. I mean, who wouldn't be?
Yeah. I mean, they were probably annoyed by themselves.
Yeah.
Well, all right, guys. So that's part 1. We'll see our good listeners, the ones who love us, with the Turner Diaries episode coming up. And the rest of you cheapskates, we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Amen.
All
right.
Ciao.
See you later.
Bye.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.